everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today's video is going to be a little bit of a different video geared more towards the newer player or even players who took a long extended break and are looking to get back into the game on where is actually a good place and how to kind of start playing Digimon in 2025. So why should we even care about starting to play Digimon in 2025? Well, one of the big things is the fact that we're actually going to be caught up to Japan in terms of set releases. So when a drop sets in Japan, it's going to drop the same time everywhere else in the world, unifying the game. And with that unification, it's obviously going to bring a lot of changes to the game. Not only is it going to be the start of a new block, but hopefully it's going to change the competitive structure and some of the other social structures as well, on top of ideally bringing about a new style and type of card design that's going to be easily accessible and bring about interest. So gone are the times are we going to be a couple of sets behind, and we're going to have lots of fun exploring all of these new opportunities that the game has together. But we still have to acknowledge that a lot of older cards are still going to be relevant, even with the new wave and influx of new cards and new card design. So getting into Digimon now is going to be a really exciting opportunity. With Digimon, we do have to take into account that it is actually still cheaper than a lot of other card games, making it highly accessible. The price tag isn't necessarily the cheapest as it once was, but it's still a relatively generous and easy game to pick up, play, get into, and collect whatever cards you feel like you want to. So the best way I could generally explain this is it's a relatively easy game to learn, but one that's hard to master, and there's always room for player skill expression to improve, so that way you could always grow as a player. Then, one other thing that I kind of generally just like about Digimon is the art. I think the art is always fire in terms of having the best art when it comes to even the most mundane and basic cards, making it very appealing for both fans of the Digimon IP and collectors alike. So I'm sure there's a whole bunch of more reasons why I could list in terms of why anyone should kind of just start playing Digimon, but I do have to have a little bit of a side note or asterisk where the game is kind of well developed at this point, and there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, and the game is at a slightly higher power level than what some people might be anticipating or expecting. But if you could get around that, the game is one of the most fun games that I have ever played, and one of the best designed TCGs on the current market. With all of that preamble out of the way, one of the big questions that newer players or even returning players has is, where exactly do I start? So there is just a lot of Digimon to explore, but not all of it is going to be the most relevant, especially when it comes to a more new player's perspective. So whenever you're going to be starting a TCG, if you're actually looking to play the TCG, the best place to start is obviously with a starter deck. So the starter deck usually is going to be accompanied with a booster box that's going to try to upgrade and enhance that starter deck, and there is something in Digimon called the 2-deck rule, where you're going to want to get a second copy of any given starter deck in order to have a full playset of all of the cards in that starter deck. So just getting 2 of the same starter deck already puts you in a really good spot to be able to play the game, and obviously getting the booster set that's corresponding with said starter deck is going to give you even more cards to play around with. But when it comes to actually learning how to play the game, inside of the starter deck, it does come with a rules sheet to kind of explain how the game overall flows and functions, but there's a ton of different resources available to you, like YouTube videos and a tutorial app, to be able to make sure that you could start playing relatively quickly and have a base level of understanding on how the game functions. So the only issue with starter decks, I will have to say, kind of comes with that caveat of a booster box being designed with the starter deck in mind to try to upgrade it. It used to be a little bit more player friendly, but as of late, Bandai has made it a little bit less player friendly in the form of needing some relatively expensive cards in order to actually upgrade the starter decks to their full capacity. These are either going to be in the forms of secret rare cards, which are some of the hardest cards to pull in a booster box, or promo cards, which don't even come inside of a booster box and sometimes are coming from outside sources. And if those promos are scarce and limited, then the price is going to go up, which I think is a little bit unfortunate and disingenuous. So you do have to keep that in mind if those are the decks that you're going to be investing in, that you're most likely going to need to spend a decent amount of money if you want to get that deck to be at full power. But outside of the fact that certain decks do want certain cards in order to upgrade them, that's not necessarily going to be the case for everything. And we do have lots of other different starter decks that you could get into and purchase in order to start your journey. So as far as whatever the best starter deck is, it's going to be the one that you have access to be able to start your overall journey and experience in playing Digimon. But not all starter decks are created equally, as we do have two different forms of starter decks. We have advanced decks, which are going to be more expensive than your average starter deck because it's going to be more powerful and meta-relevant cards with some reprints added into the mix to be able to make it the best and most competitive starter product that you could purchase. But it's not like starter decks are bad in of themselves, it's just advanced decks are, well, more advanced. So starter decks is just that baseline product that I would recommend unless you're trying to go for a more competitive aspect or angle. But no matter what you get, it's always going to be recommended to upgrade them, and you can't go wrong with any starter decks between 12 and 21, as those are going to be some of the most up-to-date and powerful starter decks with lots of room for upgrades to be able to explore and experiment with. So my personal recommendation, in spite of the upgrade issue with certain starter decks, is going to be, well, the two advanced decks are obviously going to be some of the best starter products that you can get, but starter decks 18 through 21 also are going to be some of the most recent starter decks and have some pretty solid extras and upgrades available to them. But at the end of the day, like I kind of already said, it is just what you're more comfortable with in terms of the price point and what you would have access to and what you like and want to play with when it comes to picking a starter deck more specifically. And this kind of extends over into booster boxes, but unfortunately Digimon is not necessarily designed to be able to build decks out of a single booster box, not necessarily like one singular booster box, but like if you were to buy a couple of booster boxes of the same, you're most likely not going to be able to get a full deck out of that. Most booster boxes will contain evolution lines to help pave the way to be able to build a deck out of, but you're going to need to subsidize that with other sets and other evolutionary lines that best synergize with what the deck is trying to do, which is why it's generally just cheaper to end up buying singles to cut all of that hassle and all of the RNG out of attaining the cards that you want and need in order to build your deck and play the game. But that's not necessarily fun, and there is some enjoyment to be had out of opening booster boxes and building up your collection from said booster boxes. So as far as what the best booster boxes are is really just going to depend on what you're looking to play, because each booster box is doing something different and supporting different decks. But there is a good general rule of thumb where you're just going to want to go with the newest set, because that's going to be the one that's easiest available, and it's going to have some of the most up-to-date cards in terms of design and power level. But if you really just want to invest into a singular booster box to get a couple of boxes and actually build a deck out of, Digimon still has certain boosters that are actually pretty decent at being able to build a deck out of. Obviously, you're still going to want to upgrade it with some outside cards and resources, but your initial investment is going to be coming solely from said booster box. And there's no better set to invest in when it comes to this type of design than EX sets, because EX sets always have at least one deck that you could build towards inside of them. But outside of EX sets, I do think that Special Booster 2.5 and Special Booster 2.0 are both really fantastic sets to be able to invest in order to be able to build several decks out of, similarly to EX sets, except they're a little bit on the larger scale in terms of the amount of different cards inside of them, and they're obviously more powerful cards than what you're going to be finding in your average EX set, and the decks are going to be more powerful as a result. But if you want to go back a couple of sets, you do have sets like BT12 and BT13, where you at least still kind of like an EX set have one deck that you could build towards. It's just going to vary based on what you're going to want to play, build, and invest in to be able to build out your collection and make whatever deck you're looking to play. But with any TCG, there is going to be staples that you're going to want to invest in, which are going to be basically must-have cards that help shape and change the way that we actually play and perceive the game. So depending on the type of deck that you're looking to play, some of these staples are going to be more important than others. I'm not going to exactly go over a ginormous list of every staple in the game, but this is going to be a good generalization as far as categorizing what type of staples you want to look for. So starting with part 1, we have probably some of the most important cards in the entire game, which are going to be the option cards. So what I mean by option cards more specifically is going to be the various colors of scrambles, memory boosts, and training cards. So these cards are very powerful, and there's not really a deck that doesn't want to run at least a variant of these types of cards because of just how good they are at not only upping the overall consistency of the game, but to increasing your overall tempo and efficiency at being able to play the game at the same time. And it really seems like these cards more specifically were designed to try to handle some of the problems that Digimon has had in the past and do their best to fix those issues, which again kind of just goes to why these cards go into a lot of different decks, is because the game essentially is going to be designed around these cards going forward, and as a result are some of the most key and pivotal cards in the entire game. Then when it comes to staples, as part of what staples mean is that they can be ran in a lot of various different decks. So the more generic the staple, the more decks that it can be played in, and the more decks that it can be played in, the more desirable the card, which is why certain staples can tend to be a little bit on the expensive side. So don't feel discouraged if you're unable to get some of these, just be aware that these types of cards exist because of how wide the range of play and usability they have for a lot of different decks. Then, kind of taking a little bit of a step back, we do have some very good generic cards that we're going to be playing around with, and one of the key card, I guess, types that it's going to be is Ace Digimon. So, Ace Digimon are basically like the hand traps of the game, so some of them are going to be really powerful, again, depending on the deck that you're playing, and some are going to be overall more important than others, and these are just good cards to be aware of and try to have some of the good ones, so that way you could try to use them in various different decks that require or would like their overall inclusion. Then when it comes to just overall generic staples, we do have some that aren't necessarily going to cost you an arm and a leg because they can still be played in a wide variety of decks, but similarly to aces, they're a little bit more narrow in their overall usage, but that's not necessarily a problem because they're still highly desirable cards that can be used in a wide variety of different decks. And in that similar vein, you also want to take a look at the banned and restricted list to see if any cards on that list are going to be ones that you would want to include, considering Digimon actually doesn't have that many banned cards, and most cards are just restricted to one, so these are cards that were so powerful that they did end up needing to get limited to begin with, which makes them prime cards to want to pick up because they're going to be relatively cheap, but highly effective cards nonetheless. And then when it comes to just deciding what kind of deck you want to build, this is usually the hardest part for a lot of players. To keep it simple, most players who are at least familiar with the IP just pick their favorite Digimon and then just go from there. But some people who aren't necessarily familiar with the Digimon TCG, they tend to lean more towards the mechanical aspect of the game, which we can kind of break down based on the colors that the Digimon cards can represent. But that's kind of all of the basic advice that I could give you in order to help you as a player be able to start your overall experience when trying to get into Digimon in 2025. I know this video was a little bit on the more informationally dense side, and I do have some parting information that I want to leave you off on, which are some of the online resources that I personally have used and can help any player in order to enrich their Digimon experience, again, depending on the type of player that you want to end up being. So when it comes to a card database and a online deck builder, I use DigimonCard.dev, DigimonCard.app, and DigimonCard.io. All three of these websites are fantastic at accomplishing the same thing, and just pick whichever one you find the UI to be better with, and I personally lean more towards DigimonCard.app as my go-to, and I also use DigimonCard.dev on the side. Then when it comes to actually trying to be more competitively minded and want to look at the metadata and various other deck lists, I use Digimon CG guides, Digimon Meta, and Eggman events. So all three of these are really good, but I tend to lean more towards CG Guide and Eggman events because Digimon Meta is kind of like the in-between of those, where Digimon Meta takes metadata from Japanese results and English results, which Eggman events basically has all of the big English results covered, and CG Guide has basically all of the Japanese events covered, and I prefer using both of these websites separately rather than Digimon Meta because sometimes Digimon Meta isn't necessarily the best at accomplishing what the other two are doing. But when it comes to actually trying to play in online events, most of that's just going to be set up through Limitless, and Limitless does have like a card database and deck builder attached to it, and it also does have some metadata that you could look at as well. It's just not that well organized, but it's still nice to have nonetheless. But you're going to want to make sure that you're on Discord, so that way you could join various Discord servers that are going to be hosting events based on what type of event you're going to be wanting to participate in. Then you also want to make sure to follow Digimon on various social media platforms, and if you're already on these social media platforms, then it's just going to help you find communities to be able to engage with, again, being able to join others in said discussion of the further developments of the game, and to be able to ask any questions that you would need. Then when it comes to where to actually get your product, obviously you're going to want to try your LGS first, but if you don't necessarily have an LGS, you could go to basically an online secondary market, similarly to TCG Player. Then the last bit of information is just the official website for the game, which is going to be world.digimoncard.com. But that's all the information that I have for this video. I know I could keep going on, but it already feels pretty informationally dense as is. So feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and while you're down there, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more. You could always hit that notification bell so you could stay up to date when I go live with any of my live streams or upload a video next. And with that, I hope to see everyone in the next video.